Senator Cantwell. Mr. Gray, if the United States were to go forward with attempting to acquire Greenland, it would likely require the active agreement of Denmark and also the vote of the people of Greenland that this was a mutually beneficial step. Let's focus initially on the first part. From the perspective of Denmark, what are the benefits to Denmark of considering this negotiation?
Well, Senator, I would say Denmark has failed, unfortunately, to provide the type of security that the alliance, that NATO, that we all need in the Greenland region, in the Arctic, for a long time. So having a U.S. commitment to take on some of that security burden would be beneficial to Denmark based on their behavior to date. I know they've recently increased some defense spending relative to Greenland. That's great, but we have a pattern of decades of neglect. So I would think that would be to their benefit. Look, I think the larger question here, Senator, is Denmark is not going to have as a constituent part Greenland over the long term. And so to the Greenlanders have made that clear. So the question is, what is the security architecture that's going to be in place at that ultimate point of independence? And it's not in Denmark's interest, just as it's not in our interest, to have a vacuum that is filled by China and Russia. And that's why having some sort of discussion about what comes next is so critical.
So if I'm understanding your testimony correctly, there are three principal benefits to Denmark of considering selling Greenland's territory to the United States. The first is that their existing defense obligations put significant costs on Denmark, costs that are a real burden to the government of Denmark and the people of Denmark. The second is if the United States were to shoulder the cost of providing that defense of Denmark would also significantly increase the defense of Greenland, rather, would also significantly increase the defense and security of Denmark, and limiting the role of Russia and China in the Arctic also inures to the defense benefits of Denmark. But number three, and this is an important point you made, we are seeing a growing independence movement in Greenland. If Denmark were to negotiate today with the Trump administration to sell the territory of Greenland to the United States, it would presumably be able to negotiate some substantial sum of money. That's how we purchased Louisiana Purchase, that's how we purchased the Virgin Islands, that's how we purchased Alaska. If Denmark does nothing and Greenland declares independence, then rather than getting some substantial sum of money, Denmark gets nothing. Is that a fair summary?
I think over the ultimate time frame we're talking about, Senator, that's true, because I believe we should take the Greenlanders at their word that they will be an independent country at some point. And ultimately, sir, it is not in Denmark's interest to leave a security vacuum in the high north. In addition to your point about the costs, they will suffer as much as anyone from having what I think is the 100% predictable outcome of China and Russia stepping into that vacuum if we don't have some sort of clear security architecture in place.
So I think that's very powerful. Let's turn to the benefit to the Greenlanders. And Mr. Marchese, I think if this were to proceed, it would in all likelihood require a referendum of the people of Greenland making a choice. Do you want to become an American? Do you want to join the United States as a territory or in some other legal structure? And there's been some chatter online about an early public poll that was done that suggested that currently Greenlanders did not want to do that. That does not strike me as terribly probative, given that this is the very beginning of a discussion, and any referendum would be made with the Greenlanders assessing, what do we get for it? What's our benefit? How are our lives better off? So in your judgment, how would the lives of Greenlanders be better off were they to become part of America?
Senator, I mentioned in my testimony that McGill University had done a survey of the population, and they were for mining. So I believe part of it is the recognition that were the United States to come in, more than likely, they would provide some form of financial assistance to allow private companies to come in and mine. And the vast majority, I think they said about 85% of the Inuits wanted mining, with the exception of uranium. That's a separate topic. The point is, I believe once the Greenlanders recognize that the United States would come in and provide a lot of assistance, that mining jobs would be there, and that's very important for the population. There just isn't that much mining right now, and I think that if there were the prospect of financial assistance to jumpstart the mining industry, I think you would see more Greenlanders interested in becoming part of the United States.
Well, we see significant discussion. I sat down this past week with the ambassador from Denmark and with the ambassador representative from Greenland, and one of the things we discussed is the very significant benefits that come with American citizenship. And I think, for example, of Puerto Rico, where the people of Puerto Rico enjoy a considerable upside from their current status as an American territory. And were Greenland to agree to this acquisition, the Greenlanders would get the invaluable asset of American citizenship, but also would benefit from billions of dollars of additional investment in Greenland to develop those rare earth minerals, the vast resources they have that are not currently being developed. Tell us, how would the investment increase, and how would that benefit Greenland and America if Greenland's status were to change such that it were part of the United States?
Senator, the first step, as I mentioned in my testimony, would be to actually provide, I believe the USGS would be the best forum or the best agency to do this, but with the USGS's assistance, undertake a massive mineral characterization in the country. Well, first of all, that in and of itself, it's not a short-term process. That's probably a few years to do that. That in and of itself would provide jobs for people. Remember, there are only 56,000 people there, so you don't need that many to be happy to have the entire country be happy. So the USGS comes in, provides some assistance to map, in essence, map the area to figure out which deposits are real, which deposits are not real. Once you do that, then you start getting into convincing companies to put money in, and that provides even more jobs. So I think even before you start putting a shovel in the ground to create a mine, you have, in my opinion, the potential for thousands of new jobs in a mining industry. I mean, at the end of the day, Greenland, in my opinion, can become with obviously responsible environmental oversight, can become a major international producer of all types of minerals, not to mention, as Senator Cantwell said, a potentially large hydro industry. And that in of itself requires, forget about rare earth minerals, but as an example, the hydro industry would require a tremendous amount of jobs. But remember, the expertise has to be developed also.
So there are potentially massive economic benefits.
I believe massive potential.
Senator Kim, for your helpful testimony. We'll now move to questions. Dr. Hazlett, I want to start with you. What are the specific economic benefits that putting more spectrum into the commercial marketplace would produce? And how would my spectrum pipeline legislation, which requires some full power spectrum to be made available to the commercial sector, benefit everyday Americans and American businesses?
So additional spectrum...
Can you turn your microphone on?
Additional spectrum, particularly of the flexible use variety, has been found extremely important to increasing American productivity. It allows more things to be done with wireless applications and wireless networks. And in fact, the reverse is also true. When we've had these delays that have come into the system, we have actually taken the vital inputs out of the sector, and the progress has been stymied. So in fact, getting more spectrum into the marketplace, allowing entrepreneurs and competitors to get access to expand, that explains not only the wireless revolution that we've seen with so much changing in terms of new innovations, but it explains why going forward we have to keep our eye on the ball and make sure that there is a pipeline, there is spectrum pouring into the market to be used in efficient ways, not in the old locked-in, rigid definitions of old.
Thank you. Mr. Pearl, would you agree that making more spectrum available to the private sector would result in billions in new investment and thousands of new jobs?
Yes, absolutely.
And history demonstrates that.
Yeah, no, consistently you make the spectrum available, and particularly, as I mentioned with the example of the app economy, being first really matters in that, because then you have innovators that take advantage of the capabilities that they can use in that spectrum.
And does my pipeline bill preclude the Department of Defense from accessing the spectrum it needs to accomplish critical missions, or are there ways full power commercial license use can accommodate the needs of DoD?
So your bill allows for both the possibility of exclusive use as well as shared use. And so in terms of DoD being able to continue to use some or most of the bands in order to maintain their capabilities, it absolutely creates that opening.
Now, Mr. Pearl, we've also heard concerns that reinstating auction authority could make it, could hinder President Trump's initiative to create an American Iron Dome. I am a strong and passionate supporter of missile defense and have been advocating for an American Iron Dome for some time. Based on your experience at both the National Security Council and in the FCC auction room, do you believe those concerns are well-founded, that having an auction would prevent missile defense here at home?
No, absolutely not. As long as we have the proper interagency process and we make sure that the engineers work together, we can absolutely ensure we have Iron Dome as well as increased commercial use.
And could an Iron Dome system coexist with commercial 5G use subject to geographical or location carve-outs like in the Ambit process?
Potentially it could. We do have some cases of countries that are using Iron Dome, like the Czech Republic, that are using it quite close to 5G, quite close to those systems of Iron Dome, and so that's one possibility. And there are some other ways that you could design Iron Dome so that you could have potential coexistence.
So we're told by some in the Defense Department that if any of the vast spectrum that they currently have use of goes to the private sector, that it will cripple the military's ability to defend our nation. The facts make that claim highly dubious. Right now today, about 50 nations across the globe operate commercial licensed 5G networks in the 3.3 to 3.45 gigahertz band. To take an example close to home, Mexico's 5G networks operate on frequencies between 3.35 and 3.45 gigahertz. At full power, less than 30 miles away from Fort Bliss in Texas, where the U.S. operates ground-based radar systems in the lower third band. Likewise, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and the Philippines also have 5G networks that operate between the 3.3 and the 3.45 gigahertz band. Now, given the fact that on much of the rest of the world, there are commercial players operating in those bands, is it credible that our military cannot operate in the Pacific and we cannot operate if the commercial sector is operating in those bands?
As long as the process is done responsibly, absolutely not. It will not cripple the military.
Let me ask you finally, what would the consequences to national security be if China wins the race for 5G and 6G, and if the global telecommunication network is Huawei and Chinese-based? Is that good or bad for national security? And if bad, how bad?
It's catastrophic for national security as well as both DoD and the intelligence community because we will not have access to advanced, trusted, secure technology. It's true that the U.S. will still ban Huawei, but the rest of the world will use Huawei. It will become more advanced. And it's not only telecommunications networks, which are obviously very important, but the plan the PRC has with Huawei is to leverage its control over telecom up the technology stack to be able to control other technologies. So I would say it's absolutely catastrophic risk.
Well, and soldiers use cell phones.
Yes. And absolutely, and that's something that we've discovered in Ukraine, is that a lot of these mobile technologies can be incredibly valuable. They've been used to triangulate drone attacks. They've been used to create accurate geographic maps of the combat zones. And so we're already seeing how these cell phones are, and mobile technology is critical.
Ranking Member Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, thanks for this hearing. I actually...
First, Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this hearing. I'm glad I sat through the whole thing. It was extremely enlightening. And I know in the Senate, you're supposed to abide by the rules that even though a point has been made, it hasn't been made by everybody. I will break that tradition and thank the four of you for your testimony. I thought the exchange was fantastic. We learned a lot. And with that, I yield my time.
Very good. You may win the prize for brevity. I must say, I'm not sure you're going to make it as a senator. I'm not going to follow that line. There are several things I want to revisit. There was a claim mentioned earlier that it would take 20 years to develop advanced sharing technologies. Mr. Pearl, did it take 20 years to develop the Ambit process?
No. I think that was a matter of, the study was done in about 6 months, and it was completed within 12 to 18 months, if I'm remembering correctly.
Mr. Clark, are geographic carve-outs another way to share?
Yes, sir, they are. They are, absolutely. And on the point about 20 years, I was just saying it would take 20 years potentially to upgrade all the systems with the new technology. The new technology would be available more quickly, obviously.
And was the Ambit process successful in enabling DoD and commercial 5G coexistence?
It did, yes, sir.
Some of my colleagues have also discussed low-power spectrum sharing, or CBRS. Mr. Pearl, do you think CBRS is a panacea, or do we also need full-power spectrum?
We need full-power spectrum as well. CBRS was the first really serious effort to do dynamic spectrum sharing in a band where it was really difficult. But you need both those high-power uses to really utilize the ability to penetrate buildings, walls, to really have the capital investment that the carriers need in order to offer a lot of those services. And so you need those high power services, you need low power services, which we have in 6 gigahertz and elsewhere. And both are important, absolutely.
Dr. Hazlett, I've heard concerns that CBRS has been underutilized because providers lack the certainty they need to invest in their CBRS spectrum. Do you share these concerns?
Well, there are some problems, as the FCC is acknowledging, and it's gone back to try to see how it can fix it. The claims were that was the solution, that was going to really have what is called sharing. I'll just mention the fact that all spectrum is shared. Okay, what's called exclusive use is not exclusive at all. You have networks in the United States with 100 million subscribers, and they share these aggregations of bandwidth. And in fact, there's all kinds of models that have developed between firms, between providers, when you do get the incentives to come together and make deals. And so in terms of, yes, people coming in from the private sector dealing with government assignments, the fact is that paying to share, in other words, paying to separate the allocations between the new users and the existing users, that's a very effective form of sharing. So it's really not just science, it's incentives to come together. That's why things like overlays are so important. It's why a better system of audits, which has been talked about, this has been suggested 25 years ago to the FCC, to in fact have by auction or assignment, have private firms come in and actually audit spectrum that's being used by government agencies to see if there are opportunities there for sharing. But maybe it's money coming to the agency in an improved version of the spectrum relocation process to get that out there.
Mr. Clark, we heard from my colleague Senator Fisher that a pipeline bill would require exclusive licensed use of and vacating or clearing DOD out of bands. Now, as you know, the Spectrum Pipeline Act that I've authored requires a pipeline of full power, not exclusive use, and does not identify any specific bands. Mr. Clark, is there anything in that bill that is inconsistent with your testimony or Senator Fisher's concerns?
No, in theory, it isn't. And I think the challenge will be implementation, because depending on how much your target is to try to clear, it may prove difficult to be able to work out an arrangement so that the commercial and military users can both employ that spectrum. And the auction may not be affordable or attractive from the commercial company's perspective, because the geographic patchwork they may end up with, or the spectrum sharing requirements are going to be such that maybe it makes it too expensive for them to pursue.
So, Mr. Pearl, we had an exchange with Senator Fisher and Mr. Clark where they were discussing the theory that China's public push to lead in wireless technology is just a mind game, that they're somehow baiting the United States with ambitious plans, and they're secretly holding back, trying to trick us into giving up spectrum to the commercial sector. I find that a particularly odd conspiracy theory given the actual facts of what we know. First of all, we know that Huawei and other Chinese manufacturers are actively and successfully pushing worldwide adoption of Chinese 6G equipment standards. That wouldn't be possible without China having made its spectrum available for commercial use. Secondly, China has aggressively targeted our telecommunications industry, has tapped the phones of top officials, including President Trump and Vice President Vance, and prompted this committee to fully fund a multi-billion-dollar rip and replace program to remove Chinese equipment from American networks. Mr. Pearl, would American national and economic security be harmed if Chinese firms like Huawei and ZTE set the global standard for 6G network equipment via this first mover advantage? And how would that affect the global competitiveness of U.S. companies?
So it would have a great deal of harm, and I would echo my agreement that I don't think this is a disinformation campaign. I fought the battle against Huawei and ZTE for almost 2 years, and in order for their businesses to be able to sell equipment outside of China, they need to be able to use these bands inside of China and get those economies of scale. But if they're successful in terms of setting the global standard, that means that the U.S. will have a siloed market with a few of its allies and partners, where we'll have much worse technology, much worse networks. We'll just have an inferior ecosystem, and ultimately that means that we're going to be put at a military disadvantage because, as others have commented, in a battle, the electromagnetic domain can be absolutely decisive, and we just won't have the technology to prevail in that case.
Well, I want to thank all the witnesses for very helpful testimony. Senators will have until the close of business on Wednesday, February 26th, to submit questions for the record. And then the witnesses will have until the close of business on Wednesday, March 12th, to respond to those questions. And with that, that concludes. Thank you, Chief. Mrs. Ellinger, I'm going to start with you. Thank you for coming and telling us about your son, Jake. As a father, my heart breaks for you. You have gone through a nightmare that every parent, every grandparent is terrified of experiencing. You've done an enormous amount in Texas to help prevent more tragic deaths. What advice can you give to parents who might want to make a difference preventing future fentanyl poisonings?
The first thing I would say is that talk to your kids about drugs. Use the word fentanyl. Don't be afraid to talk about it. Share statistics. Explain how dangerous it is compared to when we were growing up. And also, I would say for kids that might have a lot of pressure on them, kids in our society have a higher rate of anxiety than ever before. And to take the stigma away of it's okay if you need help. Like if you feel like you need some counseling or whatever that is, that it's okay to ask for some help, and do not turn to a counterfeit, drug to try to make you feel better.
An illustration that a DEA agent told me in Texas of just the potency of fentanyl is he took a sweet and low packet, said tear it open and empty the contents out so that there's nothing in it. And then he said stick your finger inside the packet and remove your finger, and you have a couple of little tiny specks of sweet and low.
Exactly.
That's enough fentanyl to kill you. I can tell you I've done that with our girls and tried to convey the point, but you're terrified that a teenager, a young adult at one party, somebody gives them some stupid pill and that's their last moment on earth. Through your hard work, the Texas Penal Code now criminalizes the delivery or manufacture of fentanyl that results in death. And the code requires medical examiners to properly classify fentanyl poisoning deaths. As you noted, over 60 drug peddlers have already been charged in Texas with murder since the law went into effect. Have you spoken with others in Texas about what these changes have meant to them when the tragedy of fentanyl poisoning occurs, and what have they told you?
Yes, I mean, unfortunately, I've made a lot of new friends because of this tragedy. Pain is a really strong motivator. And anytime there is a fentanyl death, whatever the 7 degrees of separation, I mean, somebody will ask me, can you talk to this person? They just lost their child to fentanyl. And I'm like, absolutely. Send me their phone number, and I can literally pull up my phone and just type in fentanyl, and 30 names of people I never knew before come up in my phone. They're extremely thankful. It's a very motivated group of people, as you can imagine. Parents that have lost their children, probably one of the most motivated group of people. And there's also, just in Austin alone, there's a group called Angel Moms, and there's probably 60 of these mothers who have lost their children to fentanyl, and that's in Austin, Texas only.
Wow. In the video you played, you said that you were unable to determine who sold the drugs to your son, Jake. In the last Congress, I passed legislation called the Trank Act to help improve the technology for detecting and identifying fentanyl and other related drugs. And Senator Cantwell and I are now working on new legislation in this space. How important is it for families to have the technology in place to track the origins and pathways that these drugs travel into the country?
I think it's extremely important. I mean, yes, shockingly, the DEA could not open Jake's phone to retrieve any information to find anyone responsible. My understanding is that these young adults are buying these counterfeit pills, thinking they're getting one thing and getting killed, through social media platforms like Snapchat and things like that. So I know that's how they're coming through. And then I also know that they are also being delivered through rideshare apps. So there is definitely a problem between all of the different social media and technology applications that these young adults use and have their hands on, not understanding the dangers of them.
Yeah. The record illegal immigration flows during the Biden administration have clearly taken a toll on the Coast Guard's counter-drug mission. And so I'm going to submit to the hearing record a DHS Office of Inspector General report entitled "The Coast Guard Faces Challenges Interdicting Non-Commercial Vessels Smuggling Drugs into the United States." This report notes that the Coast Guard did not meet its cocaine interdiction goals because it did not have enough cutters available to perform the counter-drug mission. Those cutters had been diverted to interdict illegal immigrants. The DHS OIG estimated that the Coast Guard could have interdicted up to an additional 89 metric tons of cocaine had those cutters been performing the counter-drug mission. And without objection, So ordered, entered into the record. And with that, I recognize Senator.
Thank you very much for your participation. I'll also, I caught myself a moment ago getting excited as well, but I'll remind the audience, as Chairman Grassley said, we need to conduct this hearing with decorum so that we can remain efficient. So I'd ask for your help and participation in that. And with that, I'll send it over to Senator Cruz.
Anti-Semitism is evil, it is wrong, and it is flourishing with the acquiescence and, in many cases, active participation of students, of faculty, of administrators, and government officials. And sadly, the Democrat Party has a deep and pervasive problem confronting this evil. For the last 2 years, in the wake of October 7th, this committee held 0 hearings on anti-Semitism in the United States, despite the fact that Republicans repeatedly called for it. The acts of violence prior to October 7th, 3,669 anti-Semitic incidents occurred in the United States. Following October 7th, in less than 3 months, that number spiked to over 5,000. In 2024, that number skyrocketed to 10,005 anti-Semitic incidents. This problem is particularly acute on our college campuses. Columbia University. Columbia University was a major epicenter where they encouraged, tolerated, and celebrated this vicious and vile anti-Semitism. Rabbi Eli Buehler emailed every Jewish student on campus and said, quote, "The events of the last few days have made it clear that Columbia University's public safety cannot guarantee Jewish students' safety in the face of extreme anti-Semitism and anarchy. I would strongly recommend you return home." This is the rabbi at the university saying your school will not protect your safety. And Columbia didn't do a damn thing about it. And I'll tell you what, the rabbi wasn't crazy. Here is one picture taken on the campus of Columbia. In the back are Jewish students waving American flags and Israeli flags. In the front is a Columbia student wearing a mask because these cowards are oh so brave they cover their faces, holding a handwritten sign that says Al-Qassam's next targets. Al-Qassam is the military branch of Hamas. Understand what this student is saying. She is calling for the murder of her Jewish classmates. And by the way, this student, the internet being what it is, she's been identified now on the internet. This is not a Palestinian who's subject to oppression. This is a rich blonde girl from Atlanta whose parents are multimillionaire real estate developers, and they got so proud, I'm sending my child to an Ivy League education where she'll be indoctrinated to dress up and advocate Hamas murdering Jewish students because they are Jews. Now, if you agree that is evil and vile, let me ask you something. Where are the Democrats? Not a one is here. And it's because the Democrat Party has decided the pro-Hamas wing of the party is more important than protecting Jewish students in America. And if you don't believe me, maybe you'll believe Chuck Schumer. No, that's the wrong one. No, it's not. Chuck Schumer, texting with Columbia, said the following. On January 4th, then President of Columbia, Shafik, explained to Shipman and her fellow co-chair David Greenwald that she had met with Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who advised Shafik that universities' political problems about anti-Semitism are really only among Republicans. We, the Democrats, we don't care about this anti-Semitism stuff. Ms. Lewin, am I the only person that has noticed that these anti-Israel, pro-Hamas, anti-Semitic protests, that the tents all match?
No, you are not the only one to have noticed.
Is it clear that there is significant money funding these attacks on Jewish students and attacks on America?
It is clear that there is coordination and there must be some common funding.
In the last 2 years, under the Biden Justice Department, are you aware of any investigation to follow the money behind these protests?
I am not.
Are you aware of anyone who has been indicted for funding these protests?
I am not.
Are you aware of any university that has had their Title VI federal funds cut off because they've tolerated, welcomed, celebrated, and as Senator Hawley put out, had their own officials cheering on anti-Semitism? Has even one university lost their funding?
I am not aware of any university having actually lost their fund.
And I'll point out also, some of the defenders say free speech, free speech. You're right. You have a free speech right as an American citizen to say vile, hateful, bigoted things. Let me ask you something. If a university student went into the public square dressed up in a Klan outfit, burned a cross, and said we should murder African-American students, do you have any doubt the university would expel that student?
I am fairly certain that the universities would take action and ensure that their policies
They should
were followed.
expel them if they're foreign students. They should be deported. And mark my words, if you are horrified at the anti-Semitism, you will see the Trump Department of Justice follow the money, prosecute the people who are paying for this, prosecute those engaged in violence, and cut off the money from universities that are tolerating and celebrating this. That is the rule of law. And ask yourself, why did the Biden Justice Department do absolutely nothing about this horror that is unfolding?
Thank you, Senator Cruz. Senator Whitehouse, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Just for the record.
Let me start with just a simple question, which is, can travelers trust Boeing? 346 people died in the two 737 MAX 8 crashes. We are extremely fortunate that no one died in the door plug incident. Since 2018, Boeing's mistakes have caused many people to question whether Boeing is still capable of making safe aircraft. Mr. Orkberg, what can you say here to the millions who will board a Boeing plane this year, to the millions who will put their children on the plane? And I suspect every member of this panel fly Boeing planes every single week. What can you say to the flying public as to why they should trust that a Boeing plane is safe?
Senator, the Boeing aircraft, 737 MAX airplanes take off and land every 2 seconds of the day, safely take off and land every 2 seconds of the day. I'm not denying the horrible incidents that you've outlined. We need to take immediate action, and we are taking action to make sure those accidents never happen again. My family flies on those aircraft as well, and it's critically important that we rebuild trust. And the only way we're going to do that is by building high-quality airplanes, having the metrics out of our quality system that show that we're making improvements. And I want everybody to know the entire Boeing team is absolutely committed to building the highest quality aircraft in the world. Air traffic is the safest mode of transportation, and we need to continue and continue to find and learn if there's incidences so that these don't turn into tragic accidents in the future.
As I mentioned, the NTSB's investigation of the Alaska Airlines door plug incident revealed that it was caused by manufacturing errors at Boeing. Mr. Ortberg, you joined Boeing more than 7 months after the door plug incident. What went wrong with the door plug, and what specifically has Boeing done to correct this safety lapse?
Senator, first of all, it's unacceptable that an aircraft left our factory without that door plug properly installed. And let me just make that perfectly clear. That can never happen again. One of the things, there's currently an NTSB investigation, as you're aware on that. We're not waiting for the NTSB to finish their investigation. We've taken immediate action. One of the first actions was to work with our airline customers and the FAA to go inspect all the aircraft out in the field. And we've done that and ensured that there are no other incidences of a door plug not being installed properly in the field. The second thing that we did is we found that the proper paperwork was not completed when the door plug was removed in our factory. We've gone through extensive retraining of our workforce to make sure they understand that violated our policy and that they have to complete the proper paperwork. We've eliminated or reduced the number of people who can actually do the modifications for the door plug so that in the future we have fewer people that are allowed to even touch and remove the door plugs. In addition, one of the contributing factors is we identified that the door plug needed to be removed in order to do some repairs on the aircraft that were a result of defects in the fuselage. Those defects come from our fuselage supplier from Spirit Aerosystems in Wichita. The airplane moved down our factory line too far after we identified those defects, which contributed to the risk the risk of the door plug not being properly installed. So we have made changes to our process, pushed all those defects back up to Spirit Aerosystems, so we're not bringing those into our factories. And so far, sir, we've seen a 56% reduction in defects coming out of Spirit, so that's going to help us significantly. We've also implemented a move-ready safety process, so the airplane cannot move down the production floor if equipment is not installed or rework has not been accomplished. If the aircraft has equipment not installed, we go through a safety risk assessment and look at the risk of moving the aircraft, and we've done that 800 times, and I can tell you of the 800 times, 200 times we've not moved the aircraft. We've held the aircraft because moving it would incur risk to the production system. And we've also seen a 50% reduction in work that has traveled down the factory floor. We continue to work in improving those numbers. Those are one of the KPI indicators that we're using with the FAA. So we've made drastic changes to our internal process to ensure that this will never happen again.
Okay, final question. I'm sure you're aware that whistleblowers and others, including Ethiopian authorities, have suggested manufacturing errors, particularly with electrical wiring, contributed to the MAX crashes. Mr. Ortberg, is this an issue you've discussed with Boeing employees since joining the company? And if so, what is your opinion on whether there were also manufacturing defects that may have led to the sensor defect?
Senator Cruz, obviously that happened before I joined the Boeing company. My understanding was that the cause of the crash was the MCAS design, and those design change, the MCAS has been redesigned and design changes have been incorporated in all aircraft. I'm not aware of any electrical wiring issues associated with that, but I'd be glad to look into that and get back with you.
So just to be clear, your testimony is you have not had conversations with Boeing employees about whether there were electrical issues that also contributed to that crash?
Not specifically, no.
Okay, thank you. Ranking Member Cantwell. Thank you very much, and I want to thank each of the witnesses for being here on what is a very interesting topic, an important topic, and complex topic. There are very real and complicated issues and countervailing arguments on both sides. I think there is widespread agreement on locking the clock, but where to lock it. The reason we're holding these hearings is because these are real arguments and they have real impacts on people. Let me start on the health side. Dr. Johnson, can you expand on the impact sleep deprivation has on our overall health, on our minds, our moods, and especially on young children for whom we know sleep is so vital?
Thank you for asking about that. Yeah, sleep comes, has different aspects. So one is just how much we sleep, but it's the quality of sleep and then the timing of sleep. So any disturbance in that can affect our, how we do. So we know that kids, even if over a whole week they get enough sleep, if they don't get enough during the week and catch up on the weekend, they still don't do as well. And so sleep and our circadian rhythms, they really regulate every aspect of our body, our metabolism. They affect how we think about things. They affect our choices of food. You're more likely to grab a celery stick when you're, got enough sleep, but grab that bagel or that, candy bar when you're sleep deprived. Athletic performance, we know, is better when people do sleep. Academic success in school. And then mental health has some of the most close, deep connections to sleep health. And that's why, even though people, feel better when they see light, it's that timing of light and our circadian rhythms that is so deeply intertwined, that if we can improve sleep, if we can improve those rhythms, we see those lower rates of depression overall. We see lower rates of suicide. And that's what the data, there was just a new study that came out just last week showing 6% higher rates of depression when the sunrises are set later, when we lose that critical morning light. And this gets exponentially worse in the winter when you lose the light in the morning. So Texas and the southern states actually lose that morning light for a longer period because of the curve of the earth. The more even days, you get 3 to 4 months with it being dark after 8 a.m. And some of the darkest places in the country are actually in western Texas if we were to go to permanent daylight savings time. And that's why in 1974, a lot of the push to end our experiment with daylight savings time was actually pushed by states like Florida and Texas and the southern states.
Can you also explain why consistent sleep patterns are important for teen brain development and mental health?
Yeah, so again, this goes back to our circadian rhythms. And so when our circadian rhythms are working well, they help us anticipate our day. And so what I mean by that is we have certain times when our body wants to go to sleep. And so teenagers, their natural rhythm is later. If any of you have been around a teenager, you can't just say, go to bed. They're like, I'm wide awake. We have this, what we call a forbidden zone. Their alertness just is skyrocketing in that time before bed. And so they can't get to sleep on time, but if our social schedule is set an hour earlier, which is what daylight savings time does, they don't have that opportunity to get the amount of sleep they need, and they tend to switch back and forth on weekends, and that switching affects us. And so that then affects how our brain functions. We know more and more about sleep being important for clearing toxins from our brain, which sets us up for things like dementia, Parkinson's disease. I just came back from the neuro conference with data pointing to the connections there. Our metabolism gets off, so we're more likely to gain weight. Again, even if people do exercise more, we see like 10% higher rates of obesity in places where the sun sets later. So sleep is so critically important for our metabolic health, our overall health, our mental health, how our brain functions, which affects the safety issues. The highway study, it found a higher risk of vehicle crashes even though it was light later. The effect of sleep is more powerful than almost anything else, and by aligning the sun, we can really help that.
So let's talk a little bit about the idea of states' rights. And I've heard from groups on both sides of this issue that want either permanent standard time or permanent daylight savings time. Almost everyone agrees that changing the clock twice a year doesn't make sense. Mr. Yates, in your opening statement, you said that setting the clock is fundamentally a states' rights issue. Why do you think that decision should be left to the states?
Thank you for the question, Senator. The main reason is geography, right? Like we live on this big round ball, and the sun is moving, and the difference in where each state is makes a big difference in how the sunrise and sunset time applies. And so to say that there is one solution that is exactly right for Texas, and the exact same solution is right for Atlanta, for Georgia, is what I would posit overreach by the federal government. And I might even go back to the example that is often cited about when the time change happened in the 70s, and just to give a little context to why that was such a failure. It's often cited that people didn't like it because there were children that were put at risk in the dark waiting for school. It turns out a lot of that is apocryphal. As we've heard, pedestrians are much safer with more light later in the day. But the thing that is interesting about that time change was, and this shows you how different politics was back in those days, that law was signed into law on December 15th, 1973, right in the middle of Watergate. You could say that maybe it was a distraction from other things that were going on, but it was enacted on December 15th, on a Saturday. It was it took place on January 6th, 1974, about 3 weeks later. So you can imagine the worst Monday of the year already is the one after the holiday break, where you have to go back to school and everything. To have an extra hour of sleep robbed away right before that, you can understand why it was so unpopular and why it was repealed 2 months after Nixon resigned office. So it clearly doesn't work for the federal government to come and say, this is a mandate of exactly what we should do for all of the country all at the same time. But it is the place of the Commerce Committee to say, we need a well-regulated time system. And so it makes sense to get rid of the clock changing. And if we give 2 years to the states to be able to say, so that all of these arguments can be hashed out, and they're all valid arguments, but they can be hashed out in the geography of the place where it would actually apply. And they would have time to plan and figure out what is the appropriate time for school to start to take in this evidence from neurologists, and what is the best time for all of the businesses to operate.
So maybe if we had more daylight, the Watergate break-in doesn't happen, and history would be different. Dr. Johnson, you seem to disagree with having states decide on how they should lock the clock. In your judgment, why do you think that would be the wrong approach?
So time is a measure. So Congress has the control over setting measures. I think of my husband, he likes to make a joke. He's 6'6" in the morning and 6'5" in the afternoon. We don't change the length of a foot on his diurnal pattern of his height. Time is supposed to say, you know, how the sun is moving through the sky. And so if we set it to a standard time of the sun being closer to overhead at noon, now that's something we can go by, but states then can decide how they want to set their social schedules. So instead of sort of tricking people into, you know, you all have to get up early no matter what, let's have each state decide when they want their schools to start, when businesses want to start. But let's fix a measure of time that is actually has a meaning where the sun is overhead, and then adjust, you know, the social schedule around it. And that is definitely something the states should decide on.
Thank you to each of the witnesses. Let me start with a question to the league. As I mentioned in my opening statement, Congress passed the Sports Broadcasting Act in 1961 to allow leagues to negotiate sports media deals on behalf of all teams as opposed to on a team-by-team basis. Congress granted this antitrust exemption with the intention of benefiting sports fans. How does the SBA actually benefit fans of your sport, whether it's from greater access to games or improved revenue sharing to make for more competitive balance, or something else entirely?
Thank you. As you stated, Chairman, the SBA allows us to pool broadcast rights, which has created a fan-friendly, market-efficient practice that's resulted in more output of games as opposed to less. One concrete example from Major League Baseball's perspective is this pooling allowed us to create MLB Advanced Media, where all the clubs together pooled their digital media rights. That allowed us to innovate and revolutionize the viewing experience. We were the first league to be able to stream games at all via the internet, first to computers, then to mobile devices, eventually right to the TV. So we think that's been a really big benefit of being able to take all the resources of the league together to create a product, as opposed to each individual club having to manage apps across multiple operating systems and multiple devices. It's a hard thing to do. On a small basis, you really need that economy of scale, so we appreciate the ability to do that. And while, you know, the sports leagues are each comprised of 30 or in some cases 32 different teams that compete with each other on the field, it is important that we act as a single operating entity, and that's why you're able to have, you know, 3 of us here to have this discussion instead of 92. Thank you.
Chairman, we think that we do honor the intention of the Sports Broadcasting Act, and that there is a public service in the way we've organized our media rights, as I mentioned, in our most recent national deals, which is a product of what the Sports Broadcasting Act was intended to do. On a national basis, we were able to license a record number of over-the-air telecasts, free over-the-air telecasts. That benefits all teams in terms of exposure because the games are available in every market. But also by being able to license games on a league-wide national basis, the revenue is shared equally by each team. So the point you made about revenue sharing, all teams benefit from those national distribution deals equally. Also, to echo what Mr. Gersh said, we're able to innovate by doing things that require scale at the league level. Our League Pass product, which is our out-of-market subscription service, offers fans approximately 14 different feeds of every game, different camera angles, different languages, different stats feeds for analytics, fantasy feeds, celebrity co-viewing experiences, and those things are really only achievable by pooling and doing things on a collective basis.
It's a great question, Senator, and I think that I would echo much of what Mr. Gersh and Mr. Koenig said. The one thing that I would add of substance in terms of what the Sports Broadcasting Act was intended to do was it was intended to make games available to fans at greater accessibility at a lesser cost. That is exactly what it does. If you had, in our case, 32 teams or 25 in the U.S. out there negotiating their own deals on every television market, you would have a complete fragmentation of their rights. A fan who wanted to watch all of the games would be buying from so many different packages, which the costs would be through the roof. What this has allowed us to do, the respective leagues, is to provide the greatest access to fans in the most affordable way possible. And that is, I think, the main intention of the Broadcast Act, where it's been extremely successful.
So the FCC's cable era regulations set regulatory conditions, including rules around operating within a designated market area, as well as syndicated and exclusivity rules, which can lead to blackouts. Streaming platforms aren't bound by these rules, but blackouts still take place on streaming platforms. Why is that the case? And do leagues specifically require streaming platforms to black out games for out-of-market fans?
Thank you. I think the result of the question you're asking is the way our rights are currently split up between the league and the clubs at the current time. Each club has the right to distribute throughout their entire home television territory. So when they do their deals in their market, they're on cable TV, that the league can't then offer the games in their own market. So for our streaming product, we black out in Houston because the Astros are exploiting the rights there. However, as I mentioned in my testimony, also, we now are at the moment where 29 of our clubs have their own direct-to-consumer service. So you can now, in pretty much every territory, if you want to watch the games via streaming, you can go buy that service. And if you want to watch all the other games out of market, you can buy MLB.TV. And then those two services complement each other so that it does cover the whole landscape. So I think it's less of a legislative issue and just the way that our rights are currently divided between the league and the club.
Mr. Koenig?
Similarly with the NBA, we have three different types of game distribution packages. We have a national packages, local packages, and out of market. And a fan anywhere in the country can access every game played by his or her favorite team or any other team in the league through a subscription to one or more of these packages. That's the business reality. There's no mandate that games be blacked out. National games, for example, aren't blacked out. But a fan in any market in Houston, for example, can buy the Rockets games locally from the RSNs that's operated by the Astros and the Rockets collectively. And they can watch games of the other teams through buying our League Pass out-of-market package, and obviously can access the national games. I would say that on the local front, because of some of the issues facing cable with cord cutting, the repositioning of regional sports networks, and just carriage disputes, more and more of our teams, 21 of our 29 domestic teams, have games on broadcast television. It's almost the reverse I remember in 1992 when the Cable Act was passed, and there was a study about migration from broadcast to cable. You actually referred to that in your opening statement. And now there seems to be a trend. We had this season 570 games on broadcast television, the most in 20 years. And so we are very concerned with accessibility, but any fan can subscribe to services or get them for free in the case of many local and national telecasts to any game that he or she wants.
Mr. Proper.
The NHL is similarly set up as the other two leagues, and we have local rights, we have national rights, and we have out-of-market rights. The local rights, in terms of being blacked out, is structured exactly the same, and you have to think of it as, and if you live in the local market, you get the benefit of getting your teams without having to buy the out-of-market package or anything like that. You get that benefit usually, depending on the circumstance. Most of the games are available on either broadcast or major cable television. That being said, if I'm being completely candid, as Mr. Bergmeyer said about Commissioner Manfred, everybody's looking at the future of the models right now. The models are in the state of flux, and whether streaming results in blackouts or blackouts not happening in the future is something that may be addressed by the leagues over the next 5 to 10 years, but it is at this point the current model that has worked and has worked very well. But as we continue to have flux in the system, we're going to have to continue to evaluate.
Thank you. Senator Klobuchar. Thank you. You know, Senator Klobuchar asked whether AI will lead us to heaven or hell. It reminded me of a famous observation by Yale Law professor Grant Gilmore, that in heaven there is no law, and the lion will lie down with the lamb. In hell, there is nothing but law, and due process is meticulously observed. Let me ask you this, and this is to each of the four witnesses. In the race for AI, who's winning, America or China? If the answer is America, how close is China to us? And what do we do to make sure the answer remains America will win? Mr. Altman, we'll start with you.
It is our belief that the American models, including some models from our company, OpenAI and Google and others, are the best models in the world. It's very hard to say how far ahead we are, but I would say not a huge amount of time. And I think to continue that leadership position and the influence that comes with that, and all of the incredible benefits of the world using American technology products and services, the things that my colleagues have spoken about here, the need to win in infrastructure, sensible regulation that does not slow us down, this sort of spirit of innovation and entrepreneurship that I think is a uniquely American thing in the world. None of this is rocket science. We just need to keep doing the things that have worked for so long and not make a silly mistake.
Dr. Sue?
I'll answer in the realm of chips. I would say America is ahead in chips today. We have the best AI accelerators in the world. I think China, although they have restrictions given their ability to use advanced technologies, the one thing that's very important for us all to remember is there are multiple ways to do things. You know, having the best chips is great, but even if you don't have the best chips, you can get a lot done. So I think this conversation about how far behind China is, they are certainly catching up because there are many ways to do things. I think relative to what we can do, I will continue to say, really ensure that our spirit of innovation is allowed to work. And that is having very supportive government policies to do that, having very consistent policies, and allowing us to do what we do best, which is innovate at every layer of the stack.
Mr. Trader?
So I'll speak to it from the physical infrastructure and software stack to deliver that. America is ahead, but it is the Achilles heel from the perspective of the ability, as I started to Better? Sorry about that. So the ability to build very large solutions to the computing infrastructure component of this is an area that we're going to struggle with from a permitting and building large projects to be able to deliver the power to allow those building artificial intelligence to continue to move as fast as they can in the race that we're in.
Mr. Smith?
I think the United States has a lead today in what is a close race
in a race that will likely remain close. The number one factor that will define whether the United States or China wins this race is whose technology is most broadly adopted in the rest of the world. This is a global market, and it will be defined as technology markets typically are by network effects. 18% of the people in the world live in China, 4% live in the United States, 78% live somewhere else. The lesson from Huawei and 5G is whoever gets there first will be difficult to supplant. We need to export with the right kinds of controls. We need to win the trust of the rest of the world. We need to have the financial architecture that gets not only to the countries that are industrialized, but the nations, say, across Africa, where typically China and Huawei have done so well.
So some of my colleagues have made reference to standards as something that is desirable, and I will say standards is often code word for regulations, and indeed the EU's stifling standards concerning the internet is what killed tech in Europe. We are seeing now state legislatures mimicking the EU, such as California's SB 1047, which thankfully was overwhelmingly defeated, but would have created essentially a California DMV for AI model registration. How harmful would it be to winning the race for AI if America goes down the road of the EU and creates a heavy-handed prior approval government regulatory process for AI?
I think that would be disastrous. To give a more specific answer to your previous question, which I think touches on why it would be so bad, there are three key inputs to these AI systems. There's compute, all the infrastructure we're talking about. There's algorithms that we all do research on, and there's data. If you don't have any one of those, you cannot succeed in making the best models. And as Brad said, the way for America to influence the world here is to have the technology that people most want to use and most adopt. The world uses iPhones and Google and Microsoft products, and that's wonderful. Like, that's how we have our influence. We don't want that to stop happening. So systems that stop us on any of these areas, you know, if we have rules about what data we can train on that are not competitive with the rest of the world, then things can fall apart. If we are not able to build the infrastructure, and particularly if we're not able to manufacture the chips in this country, the rules can fall apart. If we can't build the products that people want, that naturally win in the market, and I think people do want to use American products, we can make them the best. But if we're prevented from doing that, people will use a better product made from somebody else that doesn't have the sort of, you know, that is not stymied in the same way. So it is, I am nervous about standards being set too early. I'm totally fine, you know, with the position some of my colleagues took, that standards, once the industry figures out what they should be, it's fine for them to be adopted by a government body and sort of made more official. But I believe the industry is moving quickly towards figuring out the right protocols and standards here, and we need the space to innovate and to move quickly.
So if each of you could briefly answer that question, because my time's expired, so I want to be respectful of that.
I agree with the comments that Sam put up.
I agree, and I would just say, and I think the point you're making is we have to be very careful not to have these pre-approval requirements, including at state levels, because that would really slow innovation in the country.
I think that a patchwork of regulatory overlays will cause friction in the ability to build and extend what we're doing.
Thank you. Senator Curtis. All right. I have a few more questions, and then we will wrap up. Mr. Altman, what has been the most surprising use for ChatGPT you've seen? What are applications that you're seeing that are surprising?
You know, people message ChatGPT billions of times per day, so they use it for all sorts of incredibly creative things. I will tell one personal story, which is, as mentioned earlier, I recently had a newborn. Clearly people did it, but I don't know how people figured out how to take care of newborns without ChatGPT. That has been a real lifesaver. So
I will tell you a story that I've told you before, but my teenage daughter several months ago sent me this long, detailed text, and it was emotional, and it was really well written. And I actually commented, I'm like, wow, this is really well written. She said, oh, I used ChatGPT to write it. I'm like, wait, you're texting your dad, and you don't. It is something about the new generation that it is so seamlessly integrated into life that she's sending an email, she's doing whatever, and she doesn't even hesitate to think about going to ChatGPT to capture her thoughts.
I have complicated feelings about that.
Well, use the app and then tell me what your feelings are. Google just revealed that their search traffic on Safari declined for the first time ever.
They didn't send me a Christmas card.
Will ChatGPT replace Google as the primary search engine, and if so, when?
Probably not. I mean, I think some use cases that people use search engines for today are definitely better done on a service like ChatGPT, but Google is like a ferocious competitor. They have a very strong AI team, a lot of infrastructure, a very well-protected business, and they're making great progress putting AI into their search.
All right, so a question that I have spent a lot of time talking to business leaders, CEOs in the tech space, AI, and one question that I've asked that I get different answers on, and I'm curious what the four of you say. How big a deal was DeepSeek? Is it a major, seismic, shocking development from China? Is it not that big a deal? Is it somewhere in between? And what's coming next? And let's each of the four of you.
Not a huge deal. There are two things about DeepSeek. One is that they made a good open source model, and the other is that they made a consumer app that for the first time briefly surpassed ChatGPT as the most downloaded AI tool, maybe the most downloaded app overall. There are going to be a lot of good open source models, and clearly there are incredibly talented people working at DeepSeek doing great research, so I'd expect more great models to come. Hopefully also us and some of our colleagues will put out great models too. On the consumer app, I think if the DeepSeek consumer app looked like it was going to beat ChatGPT and our American colleagues' apps as sort of the default AI systems that people use, that would be bad. But that does not currently look to us like what's happening.
I would say it's somewhere in between, Chairman Cruz. When you think about what we learned is, there are different ways of doing things. So we have lots of incredibly innovative people in the United States. American models are clearly the best by far. However, when you have constraints that are placed, there are other ways of doing things, and I think we learned a few things in the process. I think the open source nature of DeepSeek was one of the things that probably was most impactful in just terms of how much can be done in an open source, type of model and open ecosystem. But clearly, the United States is leading, and we need to continue, as we said, to accelerate innovation and adoption, as you started this hearing with.
I think DeepSeek did a lot of things. One of the things that it did was it sort of raised the specter of China's AI capability to a much broader audience than was perhaps focused on it prior to that, right? And so you saw that kind of reverberate through the financial markets. You saw like a broad-based reaction, and suddenly everyone knows what DeepSeek is, and the fact that China is not theoretically in the race for AI dominance, but actually is very much a formidable competitor. And so, it was a starting gun in some ways for the broader population and kind of maybe the broader consciousness of the fact that this is not a fait accompli, and that we're going to have to work as America together to kind of propel our solutions forward. And so I think that was one of the lasting impacts that we will see from that.
I would say, like Lisa, that somewhere in between. It wasn't shocking. I mean, it was one of a number of startups that we were following in China that we saw as having the potential to be innovative in this space. I do think there's a really interesting and important point that constraints encourage innovation in other ways. And I just think one of the interesting facts about DeepSeek is that of their, say, 200 or more employees, that was their size when they released these models, almost all of their employees, by design, were 4 years or less out of university. They wanted to hire people that would not bring to their work traditional ways of doing things.
So the kids are taking over the world?
They do, every generation.
Related to that, were you finished with that, Mr. Smith? Related to that, we talked at the outset about the AI diffusion rule being rescinded, which I'm glad. I think it was a bad rule. I think it was overly complex. I think it put on a number of our trading partners unfair restrictions. And so I'm glad the president is rescinding it. That doesn't necessarily mean that there should be no restrictions, and there are a variety of views on what the rules should be concerning AI diffusion. NVIDIA has argued that we want American chips everywhere, even in China. Others have argued that we want to restrict at least the most advanced processors. I'm curious, each of the four of you, what do you think the rule should be, if anything, is to replace the AI diffusion rule? And Mr. Altman, we'll start with you.
I also was glad to see that rescinded. I agree there will need to be some constraints, but I think if the sort of mental model is winning diffusion instead of stopping diffusion, that directionally seems right. That doesn't mean there's no guardrails. It doesn't mean we say, like, we're going to go build a bigger data center in some other country than the US. Our intention is to build our biggest and best data centers in the US, do training in the US, build the models here, have our core research here. But then we do want to build inference centers with our partners around the world, and we've been working with the US government on that. I think that'll be good. To this point, that influence comes from people adopting US products and services up and down the stack, maybe most obviously if they're using ChatGPT versus DeepSeek, but also if they're using US chips and US data center technology and all of the amazing stuff Microsoft does. That's a win for us, and I think we should embrace that, but make sure that, you know, the most critical stuff, the creation of these models that will be so impactful, that should still happen here.
Dr. Su?
I think we would totally agree with the concept that some restrictions are necessary. This is a matter of national security as much as it is about AI diffusion. That being the case, we were happy to see the rescinding as well. And, you know, we view this as an opportunity to really simplify, right? At the end of the day, you know, we've talked about the need to drive widespread adoption of our technology and our ecosystem. You know, simple rules that can be, you know, easily applied, that really allow our allies to, you know, protect our technology while still utilizing the best that the United States has to offer, I think is a good start in terms of where we're going. And, you know, again, this is an area where I think the devil's in the details, and it requires a lot of balance. And so from an industry standpoint, you know, it's our job to put on the broader hat and work hand in hand with the administration and Congress to, you know, make our best recommendations so that it is a policy that has some stability as we go forward as well.
Mr. Trader.
So I'll echo what Sam and Lisa said, but, you know, national security is paramount. And then once you've addressed the limitations around national security, the opportunity to work with regulators to put together a regulatory framework beyond that makes a lot of sense. And the diffusion rule didn't allow us that opportunity to participate fully enough to feel like we were going to come away with what would be an optimal outcome at this point.
Mr. Smith?
I think we've all discussed the right recipe. Simplify, eliminate these tier 2 quantitative restrictions that undermine confidence in access to American technology, but enable even the most advanced GPUs the country has to be exported to data centers that are run by a trusted provider, that meet certain security standards. That means both physical and cybersecurity standards, that there is protection against diversion of the chips, and there are precautions against certain uses. And that means two things. One is that there are controls in place to ensure that, say, the PLA, the Chinese military, isn't accessing and using these advanced models or advanced chips, in a data center, regardless of the country that it's in. And there are certain harmful uses that one should want to prohibit and preclude, like using a model to create the next pandemic, a biological weapon, a nuclear weapon. And I think that there is an approach that is coming together that can be retained and can move forward and that strikes the right balance.
Okay, final question for each of you. Would you support a 10-year learning period on states issuing comprehensive AI regulation or some form of federal preemption to create an even playing field for AI developers and deployers?
I'm not sure what a 10-year learning period means, but I think having one federal approach focused on light touch and an even playing field sounds great to me.
Aligned federal approach with, really, thoughtful regulation would be very, very much appreciated.
I agree with both of my colleagues.
Yeah, I think that builds obviously on the op-ed that you and Senator Graham published last year. And I think giving the country time, your analogy, your example was this work for the internet. There's a lot of details that need to be hammered out. But giving the federal government the ability to lead, especially in the areas around product safety and pre-release reviews and the like, would help this industry grow.
Well, I want.
Thank you, Senator Cruz.
Thank you. Mr. Baserbi, as we've been discussing, I believe the Chinese Communist Party presents the most significant long-term strategic threat to the United States. I also believe that China is a global threat that has to be confronted globally, including in Africa. We have a vast range of interests in Africa and a complicated security architecture. Our interests there are counterterrorism, trade in critical mineral supply lines, global biosecurity, preventing illegal immigration that threatens allies in other parts of the world, blocking illicit finance of hostile actors, and even, importantly, space development. And across Africa, again and again, the Chinese have exploited local political, economic, and sometimes even cultural conditions to undermine American national security interests. Sometimes they do it by securing bilateral and multilateral agreements that block American goals. Other times they do it by creating instability, but they are actively doing it. Talk a little bit about the specific tactics that China is using in East Africa and the Horn, and what are the specific conditions they are exploiting?
Yeah, thank you, Senator, for the question. China, first of all, has a long-standing strategy for the continent. That's been a topic of this conversation, is the U.S. doesn't have anything comparable. And they are highly disciplined about implementing it. So that's sort of the foundation of what they're doing. As far as specific tactics, they like to engage at a very senior level, the highest possible senior level. They do that in a variety of ways. Some of it is as open as bribery, but a lot of it is helping leaders, for instance, with key infrastructure projects that helps them politically in the domestic space, or just expressing solidarity. That rhetoric is important. But even the diplomatic exchanges, they engage, as I said, at a very high level, but they do it constantly as well. I referenced in my opening remarks over 100 visits from senior Chinese officials to this area. So they engage at a much higher tempo and at a much more senior level than U.S. Diplomats do. So those are some of the specific tactics that they use. but they're not unique to East Africa. They use them across the continent to great effect. And then easy money loans, very important to their strategy, investment, trade agreements. We're seeing more and more free trade agreements where these so-called green lanes, where they're preferential access to the Chinese market for agricultural goods. So it's genuinely a wide array of tactics that are grounded in a long-term strategy.
And how has Chinese involvement impacted the ongoing conflicts in the region?
Yeah, so I think usually China actually prefers stability because that facilitates what they're trying to do in other areas. They generally try to stay out of these types of things. We have seen some sort of, I would argue, weak diplomatic efforts from the Chinese. They do have a special envoy for the region who occasionally goes and talks to the various leaders, but I don't think anything substantive comes of it. And they do contribute to peacekeeping operations, but that's much more, I would argue, about them building both diplomatic heft, but also capabilities for and experience for the troops in these types of austere environments where they're often put. So I think they are not nearly as helpful as they could be. I think where they actively are negative are the Chinese weapons that flow through the area. Back in the original Sudan civil war, they armed the Omar al-Bashir regime, which was genociding Darfuris at the time. They armed both Ethiopia and Eritrea during their border war in the late 1990s. And Chinese weapons continue to flood the area. We're seeing Chinese bombs and other things, probably re-exported from UAE, show up in Sudan.
So many of the agreements China has been locking in are explicitly military agreements. Since 2017, China has operated a military base in Djibouti. The CCP Beijing is actively working to deepen ties across the region to secure greater access to the Red Sea and key maritime routes. Describe the nature of China's specifically military cooperation in the Horn.
Yeah, so you referenced the flagship, which is the Djibouti base, but we have seen a very real uptick in military trainings. So I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, the Chinese inaugurated an annual meeting for African defense chiefs. They convene in Beijing. And that has been ongoing, I believe, for 3 years, if I remember correctly. I also referenced in my written testimony the fact that PLA Navy vessels participate in these anti-piracy task forces in the Gulf of Aden. They then will go all around the continent doing port calls, both on the Indian Ocean, but also the Atlantic Ocean side. That's clearly an effort to build blue water naval capabilities that they covet so they can project power into the South China Sea and probably for an eventual invasion of Taiwan. And again, the weapons, so weapons training, deployments, and I already referenced the peacekeeping operations. I would say those are the primary elements.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's some damn fine kissing up to the staff. And given that mine provided Diet Dr. Pepper to me, I echo that sentiment for keeping me well caffeinated. As I discussed in my opening statement, the Chinese have exploited local political, economic, and sometimes even cultural conditions to undermine American national security interests. Sometimes they do it by securing bilateral and multilateral agreements that block American goals. Other times they do it by creating instability. But they are actively doing it, and I want to hear from you how they do it. Could you walk us through, region by region, how China is exploiting these conditions to undermine U.S. interests?
You bet, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to just jump right into that. As we run around the continent, most of the playbook that China uses occurs everywhere around the continent. But there are some regional trends. So as I roll around, everything is true everywhere in Africa, but there are some focuses that change a little bit. If I were to start in Central and Southern Africa, of course, it most heavily relies on the mineral space and the extractive space. These are the minerals that they've gone into fast and hard. And part of it, part of the playbook that I think you're asking for was first just being there first and having an incredibly high risk tolerance. And by being able to go in without having to worry about meeting the needs of their shareholders or their board of directors, and being able to focus on just capturing that market without worrying about turning a profit right away, that allowed them to keep and maintain the entire supply chain. Of course, we try and open a minerals processing plant in the U.S. There's a lot of permitting and issues in that. Same with Europe. But in China, where they don't care, they were able to toss that up right off the bat. And then once they had a sort of a dominant position there, they were able to use that to continue to maintain. One of the things we've seen recently is the global need for lithium is almost infinite and vastly 30, 40 times more than we currently have. So there's a lot of interest in engaging in new lithium operations. So as Western companies were looking to both look at mining, at processing, and at the whole supply chain, China immediately dumped a lot of lithium on the market, crashing the price. And of course, what you see there then is as these Western companies were going to solicit financing and talking to banks and doing that kind of work, with the crashing lithium price, suddenly the projects were no longer viable. And that kind of manipulation is a big part of the threat that they have against the United States. When we look in East Africa, we see a lot in the regards of infrastructure kinds of investment, the traditional roads, rail, bridges, that kind of thing, hydroelectric facilities. But let's not forget digital infrastructure. Being in first in that matters as well. A lot of these can be found as just debt vehicles. I've on multiple occasions dealt with governments that have asked my help in finding investors to privatize some of their, because they can't maintain the debt. But then they find that the market value of this item is double or is half what they still owe on the facility. So they're just trapped into that forever. That's hugely problematic. And in the digital side, of course, if you want to be part of the modern economy, you're going to need to have trusted, safe networks. And so basically every country on the African continent has come to me to ask help in encouraging the big tech companies, Oracle, Microsoft, Google, et cetera, to come to their country. But they won't come if they can't trust the networks that are there. And so many of the countries are faced with the issue of, if we want to have a modern digital economy, if we know where we need to be in the future, we actually need to rip out those systems and replace them, because we simply can't operate in isolation with substandard technology in which all of our data is now subject to Chinese manipulation. And that's been hugely problematic across the continent. In West Africa, it's often kind of a mix of the two. But one thing I would add to that that's not frequently mentioned is, in addition to this insatiable desire for minerals, it's all sorts of extractives, including timber, the deforestation, but especially fishing. When you look at the fishing grounds especially of Western Africa, but really of all coastal Africa, that is the protein for the people. But when you see these Chinese trawlers coming in and utterly destroying the fishing grounds, and you can see them on over-the-shelf, unclassified satellite imagery, trawling back and forth, then suddenly doing a beeline 60 miles offshore, meet a buy boat, offload all the fish, come back to port and say, oh, we didn't catch anything again today. And they don't catch anything any day, at least according to their official records. And meanwhile, the amount of food available for the Africans is much more expensive, in much less supply. And this is a direct and tremendous threat. And forgive me for going on a little bit more on that subject, but it's not one that normally gets mentioned. But it is indicative of the business model that the Chinese entertain on the continent.
Now, of all those threats you described, what keeps you up at night? What worries you the most?
I ain't gonna lie, I'm actually really excited to work in Africa, and there are a lot of really positive stories. So actually, I sleep pretty well in that regard. I'm all in on Africa's future because I really believe in the place. And a lot of people talk about how in 2040 it's going to be this much, but the fact is, Africa is hugely important right now, and I'm excited by that. But you asked the question, so let me go ahead and and address that. Part of it is the kind of irreparable damage that a lot of these operations can have. I'd say probably the number one example was just recently when a Chinese tailings dam collapsed and they dumped something like 40 million gallons of sulfuric acid into the Kafue River, just potentially destroying the livelihoods of 6 million people. That was just the one example, but that kind of shoddy behavior and completely ignoring the rules-based order in which they ostensibly live, that kind of thing becoming systemic, yeah, that would be what keeps me up.
Thank you. Senator Booker. Ambassador, I want to get back to the topic of critical minerals. In your opening statement, you described the really dominant position China has with critical minerals in Africa. And unfortunately, America lost significant ground in the Biden administration. And you focused on the supply chain, and President Biden canceled mineral leases for the Twin Metals mine in Minnesota. And the administration also deliberately rejected Alaska's Ambler Road project. And blocking domestic critical minerals mining only reinforces our overseas critical mineral supply chain reliance, and that's a market, unfortunately, that China dominates. Less than 1% of the global rare earth element refining capacity exists in the United States. Most U.S. mined or collected rare earth element material is sent to China for separation and processing. Trump's executive order calling for, quote, immediate measures to increase American mineral production has put us back on the right course. We need your leadership to marshal resources to cultivate partnerships in the critical mineral sector in Africa. And for the United States to be an alternative to China in Africa, we need to create real alternatives in Africa. We need to translate the talk and policy into tangible action and impact. Could you please describe the efforts underway within the department to work with our international partners across Africa and U.S. companies to build a more resilient, transparent, and diversified supply chain of critical minerals from Africa to the United States?
Thank you very much for raising that. I spend more time working with the American private sector than I do with government officials because they're the ones who are going to be key to solving this issue. It would be easy and cheap and ultimately disastrous to continue to rely on China for these sorts of things. We do have to have our own domestic capacity. I'm not the one who does domestic work, but there are people across this government that do, and we engage on a regular basis. When it comes to making sure our allies and partners are involved as well, I spent a good bit of time this morning with the European Union's Peace and Security Committee because they're concerned about these issues as well. And they also have a challenge that they need to invest in minerals processing and usage. Quite simply, it's my job to get the throughput for that processing. As we have operations in Houston for developing critical minerals processing, we have new operations also coming up the Mississippi Valley, particularly in Arkansas, I believe. It's my job to get the throughput for that. And that's where I'm engaging with the mining companies and with the transportation companies and the power companies to make sure that that's doable.
China has also been leveraging its power to advance its diplomatic goals and undermine American diplomacy. And it uses its relationship to undermine, in particular, the diplomatic status of Taiwan. In April, Somalia banned Taiwanese passport holders from entering the country in response to deepening ties between Somaliland and Taiwan. This action by Somalia prevented Taiwan's foreign minister from undertaking a planned visit to Somaliland. As if the Chinese Communist Party's political interference wasn't enough, there are reports that the support China provides to the Somali government makes its way to anti-Somaliland groups opposing Somaliland. Let me be clear. China is leveraging Somalia against the pro-U.S., pro-Israel, pro-West Somaliland because of Somaliland's relationship with Taiwan. How should the United States approach this challenge and similar efforts by China to undermine Taiwan's diplomatic status in Africa and the Horn specifically?
Thank you very much. The question of Taiwan across Africa is hugely important. Taiwan is an extremely productive, positive, and responsible member of the international community. And so our engagements with them and cooperative engagements with them across the continent matter. And in the countries where they're finding problematic issues, where we believe at the behest of China, they're receiving harassment from those governments. For us, it's critical to make clear to those governments that when they harass Taiwan like that, they're also making it clear their own lack of commitment to a positive kind of engagement with an open society. And for that reason, they would be putting in jeopardy or calling into question their relationship with us. And so those are the kinds of conversations we need to keep having. We need to make sure it are understood. It's best to be able to stave these off before they become public, but diplomacy is often operates in an imperfect information environment. But making sure that people understand afterward that this is going to affect the relationship with us. And that's why we were happy that the government of Somalia actually rescinded that order and started respecting the Taiwanese passports again.
Tell us a bit about how the United States should be assisting and strengthening partners like Somaliland to counter China.
We engage with partners like that, the ones who are looking to go in a positive direction, who have that positive trajectory. We'll meet them where they are and find ways to engage. And we do have extensive engagement with Somaliland. We do currently respect the territorial integrity of Somalia, and the decision of its construction is a question for Somalians, including Somalilanders. But for us, it's vastly more important that all of these different groups and these different states recognize the greater threat of ISIS and al-Shabaab, which are causing just traumatic attacks and mayhem in their country, that's the real enemy, and that they need to work together against that rather than spending their efforts with political infighting amongst themselves.
Okay, so one more question. I'm deeply concerned about our posture in Africa regarding space development. This is an area where the United States must lead. We already have a NASA presence in South Africa, Angola, Rwanda, and Nigeria, are all signatories to the Artemis Accords. Several other countries, including Kenya, are also emerging as leaders in developing space capabilities. Africa's space industry is ripe for U.S. commercial diplomacy. The department should be working hand in hand with the private sector to help our partners in Africa develop their own space capabilities. Last month, I met with 11 members of Botswana's National Assembly, and I have since learned in March, Botswana launched its first satellite into space in partnership with SpaceX. This is the type of commercial partnerships we need to see more of. What are your thoughts on commercial space diplomacy, and how can we push back on China through building space partnerships in Africa?
Thank you for that. Space is an exciting new opportunity for the continent, for everyone in the world. The African Union just established its African Space Agency with a founding engagement in Cairo. We were there in force because this is where we can accomplish a lot of interesting things. So we hit on that. When Botswana was launching its satellite with SpaceX, the president was flying to California for that, so we frankly made sure by inviting him to stop into Washington, because we specifically wanted to recognize what it means to have a forward-looking policy. I don't think I'm breaching any confidence when I say that Secretary Rubio described it as the single best meeting he'd ever had. It was all positive. But this is what happens when you work with a government that really wants to do things the right way. And that's why, even though we still have to advocate for American companies in Botswana, we talk to them about ongoing practices and with their neighbors. The simple fact is they're a good partner. We engage with them extensively, and we end up having tremendous success with it. And they're an example for the rest of the region.
Great. You may have to tell the secretary that he hurt our feelings, that the meeting was better than when he meets with us. That really is hurtful. Senator Booker.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. Chairman Cruz, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the chairman for hosting this hearing. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. Mr. Jeffries, let me start with you. Does AAR have any recommendations for this committee to stop freight theft? For example, would requiring DOT and DOJ to better coordinate when they receive information on freight theft help tackle this problem?
We absolutely have recommendations, and this is an issue that plagues not only the railroads, but the entire supply chain, and it's not going away. It's only getting bigger. Our adversaries are very organized criminal enterprises, strategically hitting high-value cargo. So first of all, thank you to you for your support on the Combating Organized Retail Crime Act. Thank you to others on the committee as well. We've got very good bipartisan support. That bill does three things. It increases information sharing across government. It creates investigatory motivation with the feds, and then it really pushes for some enforcement because oftentimes we arrest people and they're right back out on the street. Information, as you mentioned, information sharing is key. Coordination, DOT, DOJ. I'd throw DHS in there as well because they're kind of at the tip of the spear with a lot of that. Absolutely, we support it. Thank you for your support, and we want to keep working with this committee to address this problem.
Excellent, very helpful. Mr. Gilbertson, the Department of Transportation under Biden added both DEI and climate change-related criteria to the grant approval process, which Congress did not include in the authorizing statutes. For example, the Biden DOT thought of the Consolidated Rail Infrastructure Safety Improvement, or CRISI grant, as a program to, quote, explicitly address climate change, gender equity, and racial equity, and scored applications based on how well the applicant met these criteria. In fact, the Biden DOT required applicants to address, quote, equity as a condition of receiving construction funds. Mr. Gilbertson, are you aware of the challenges short-line railroads faced when applying for grants requiring such criteria that were unrelated to the merits of the actual project?
Senator, I previously mentioned that the CRISI grant approval process has been unnecessarily long, in our opinion. I'm not aware of the internal decision-making of how FRA has weighted these factors, but as a matter of policy, we would ask that the FRA limit its evaluation to the statutory criteria.
Asking that the government follow the law seems a pretty reasonable request from American citizens, and one would, I for one am grateful we now have an administration willing to follow the law instead of the preceding administration. Mr. Cumber, you talked about the acquisition of right-of-way as a major challenge to expanding Brightline in Florida. Brightline West is taking a creative approach by working with the state departments of transportation to build track along existing right-of-way. If Congress wanted to incentivize greater competition in the intercity passenger rail sector, what should we be thinking about regarding right-of-way acquisition? You get your microphone.
Great question, Chairman Cruz. There are a couple ideas that we have. The first is using the categorical exclusions to allow projects to move forward when they're in existing transportation corridors would significantly reduce the time it would take to implement projects. A normal kind of arc of a project is, if you think about 3 years of pre-development work, 5 years to construct, 3 years to get to stabilization, any extra time it takes to get that environmental process completed makes the project sometimes not financially feasible. Second, when it comes to the grant programs, our view is give the private sector the eligibility to apply for all the different US DOT and FRA grant programs. And I said that in my oral testimony. We just want all passenger models to be treated equally. Amtrak can compete, state-sponsored systems can compete, privately operated systems can compete. And if we have a level playing field, we think the benefits of getting competition into the passenger rail industry will happen.
And let me follow up. What could Congress do to help facilitate more private sector participation to promote competition in intercity passenger rail in this country? And Mr. Jeffries, I'm interested in your thoughts on this as well. But Mr. Cumber.
So, I strongly believe, obviously, competition makes everyone better. And there is a association out there that it's the Association for Innovative Passenger Rail Operations. And what they've been pushing for is when long-distance systems are being contemplated using federal funds, that they would have to be competed as opposed to Amtrak being the default operator. And that's something that I think in the reauthorization process, the committee could consider.
Mr. Jeffries?
Yeah, I think competition is good on that front. I also think getting all the stakeholders together before you launch on a project is really helpful, because oftentimes it involves a state, a municipality, a private entity, a host railroad perhaps, and getting everybody together before you roll out on new passenger projects results in a better outcome at the end of the day.
Thank you.
Is fossil fuel influence in this building. And I contend that that is what today is all about. And I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse. One final bit of questioning for you, Mr. Arkush. Define for this committee what homicide means.
Oh, sure. So homicide is a legal term that refers to, it's essentially a blanket term for any form of unlawful killing. And an unlawful killing is causing death with a culpable mental state. Causing a death means substantially contributing to it or accelerating it, and a culpable mental state could be negligence, knowledge, recklessness.
So you wrote an article in 2023 entitled, quote, "Climate Homicide, Prosecuting Big Oil for Climate Deaths." In that article, you argue that oil and gas executives could be prosecuted, not just sued, but criminally prosecuted for homicide, for murder, based on climate change. Is that right?
That's right. I mean, I would be careful with the wording, because murder, again, is a technical term. And definitely we're not arguing that they could be prosecuted for first-degree murder. That's killing with, intent.
But you want to put them in prison for homicide, lock them up, treat them as criminals, put them in. Murderers get put, people who commit homicide get put in jails with violent criminals, and your position is this is a reasonable and rational thing, that we should put the people leading the energy companies in America, producing 8.5 million jobs, we should arrest them and throw them in jail. Is that correct?
It could be the case that some executives should be prosecuted in that way. Of course, you can't put a corporation in jail, so there are other remedies in that situation.
But you can put human beings in jail, and presumably you'd put the corporate officers in jail.
Yes, you can.
You'd prosecute them for murder. So don't let there be any ambiguity. And by the way, Senator Whitehouse was really eager to make clear that you're the minority witness. You're the witness he wanted. He was eager to introduce you. I'm going to go on the record as saying that is a moonbeam wacky theory, that you want to prosecute people creating jobs and producing energy for murder. Let me ask you, Mr. Arkush, how did you get to the Capitol today?
So here's what I want to tell you.
How did you get to the Capitol today?
I took an Uber.
You took an Uber.
Yep.
Now, was that in an automobile?
Yes.
Did that automobile have gasoline in it?
Yes. This is very, very cute. I see where this is going.
So I'm glad you think it's cute. Under your theory, you emitted carbon emissions.
Yep.
Should you be arrested in this room right now and prosecuted for murder?
No.
Why?
That's not what the law holds.
So tell me why, because you're willing to say the guy who sold you the gasoline should be prosecuted for murder. You're the one that benefited from it. Couldn't you have ridden a bicycle or maybe like some fairy dust to get here?
The guy who sold the gas and 50 years ago knew that it was going to cause globally catastrophic damage that would cause problems for humanity.
But you have exquisite knowledge of this. You were saying you were an expert. So on mens rea,
I'm not done.
You have a level of culpability because you claim that the act of getting in that car was violence, it was murder, that you should be locked up. Why do you get to violate these principles in a way that you just want to lock up the person who sold you the gas, but not the beneficiary of it.
That's your claim, not mine, because to be liable, there are a bunch of reasons, but one of them is you have to substantially contribute to the harm, to the death.
Okay,
And
so
I am not a,
how many
how many
car rides is substantially? Is it one? Is it two? Is it 10? How many?
A single individual couldn't possibly contribute enough. The point is...
Well, what about if, say, you're a Democrat politician who
do you
flies
actually,
in
do you want me to answer
What
these
about if you're
questions?
a Democrat politician who flies private
It would be
jets?
helpful if you're asking the questions. Doesn't he get to answer them?
He gets to answer them in my time, just like he gets to answer them in your time when you were asking them.
Seems like I don't get to answer.
So what about Democrat politicians who fly private planes all the time? People like John Kerry, who say, for someone like me, a private jet is the only reasonable way to travel. John Kerry has the climate footprint of a small town in Tennessee. Would you prosecute John Kerry for murder?
So depending on how you calculate it, U.S. fossil fuel, or the oil majors, private oil majors, are responsible for around half of global emissions.
My question was, would you prosecute John Kerry for murder?
Obviously not, no.
Okay, so Democrat politicians are exempted.
There is no individual...
Democrat activists are exempted.
I'm not going after people for carbon footprints. The whole thing is actually...
Well, why not, though? Under your principle, carbon is killing us. You claim it is homicide. By the way, this is a whack job theory. You teach in law school. If one of your law students wrote this on an exam, any law professor... General Kobach, you were a law professor for years. If I wrote, it's homicide, lock them up, what grade would you give me and why?
It wouldn't be a good one. And part of the problem here is the same problem that the Baltimore judge, in rejecting all of the 8 claims brought by the city of Baltimore, pointed out with regard to public nuisance theory. And that is, it's not just the company that took the oil out of the ground. The individual consumer made a choice to use it as well. She said she dismissed all their claims, rejected their attempt to stretch public nuisance doctrine to cover, quote, the results of fossil fuel usage and gas emissions by third parties located all over the world. You can't put the blame either in a homicide case or in a public nuisance case just on the company that extracted the oil from the ground, because everybody's using it, and we're all involved in it, and that's why it doesn't fit homicide easily, and it doesn't fit public nuisance easily either.
With all respect, I don't think that Mr. Kobach is familiar with the relevant law in this case. A defendant in a homicide case can't defend by saying somebody used my products exactly as I intended them to while I was lying to them about
So you're saying we should prosecute you for murder?
No.
Because you drove an automobile here?
No. I'm saying...
Well, you said you couldn't use a defense. The fact that somebody else does it,
you
you contributed. You're a murderer. Under your wacky theory, you're a murderer too.
I'm not sure I should be trying to speak. Can I finish a sentence?
For once, we agree. Senator Whitehouse.
Will you allow the witness to answer without interruption during my time?
It's your time. You're welcome.
Just interrupted him during my time.
You are welcome to sing. No, he was actually, it was the end of my time. You're welcome to sing, or you can conduct poetry in iambic pentameter. You can blow a kazoo. You can do whatever you wish.
Of the Communist Party that's trying to take us down. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. And I would note one of the reasons why the left and the Chinese communists resort to litigation is because their ideas are incredibly unpopular when the American people vote on them. So, for example, in the United States Senate, every Senate Democrat voted in favor of the California waiver that would effectively ban the internal combustion engine in 18 states across the country. Every Senate Democrat voted in favor of it, but you know what? The citizens aren't voting in favor of it. They're not campaigning. We don't see our Democrat colleagues saying, we're going to ban the internal combustion engine. Even in bright blue states, even in Vermont and Rhode Island, the voters are not saying, take away the car out of my driveway. And yet, Democrat office holders are trying to use government power to fight the Democrat wishes of their electorate. General Kobach, let's talk about the courts. The Climate Judiciary Project, backed by the Environmental Law Institute, Energy Foundation, and private donors connected to plaintiffs' law firms, has trained over 2,000 judges, many in key jurisdictions where these climate cases are pending. Is it appropriate for sitting judges to receive climate science, quote-unquote, education from advocacy groups like the Environmental Law Institute, groups that are directly tied to the plaintiffs in active litigation?
No, Mr. Chairman, I do not believe it is any more than it would be appropriate for a group of justices to go on an extensive training conference and be trained in how to dispute or defend the fossil fuel industry. When you have a group of litigants in a pitched legal battle in approximately more than 3 dozen cases, if we're talking about more than just the ones brought by cities and counties, the judges are there to be neutral. And the worst thing I fear going into any case on any issue is if I know that the judge is already dug in based on prior things the judge has done or said against me. So, I don't think it's appropriate for litigants to be training the judges in essentially what their experts are going to say in the trial.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond to this as well?
No, because we've got limited time if someone else wants to get into it. General Kobach, isn't it true that... Actually, go ahead, Mr. Arkush.
Well, I just wanted to say that what Mr. Kobach is saying he opposes is exactly what's happening from the defense side as well. The Environmental Law Institute has multiple oil companies on its board, executives of oil companies, BP and Shell, and it has counsel representing them in court in important leadership positions.
So we may be breaking news here. Are you on behalf of Public Citizen calling for the Environmental Law Institute to stop training judges and indoctrinating judges?
What I'm saying is it doesn't make any sense to say that they're indoctrinating judges as some sort of leftist plot.
Okay, let's be clear. I'm calling for them to stop training judges because I think they are indoctrinating them. It's interesting you said that, but you weren't willing to go to the natural next step of, therefore it should stop.
I don't know that much about it, but I do know that BP and Shell are on the board.
Mr. Arkush, if you believed what you were saying, you would be willing to call for it to stop. You're not, and that suggests you know damn well what it is they're training the judges, and it's indoctrination, and you don't want it to stop because you want the judges to be biased and rule in favor of these crackpot theories. Now,
I disagree
General
that
Kobach,
BP and Shell are on the board of an organization.
Isn't it true?
Judges against them.
Mr. Arkush, your time is done.
Thank you.
Isn't it true that these programs, often hosted in conjunction with the Federal Judicial Center or the National Judicial College, can obscure ethics disclosure requirements because they fall under judicial exemption categories?
Yeah, I think, Chairman, you're correct. There are definite ethical problems, and in addition to the overarching sort of federal model of ethics, you also have additional state ethical rules that may be violated as well. But at the end of the day, it's judicial neutrality that is the biggest ethical constraint on our entire Article III courts and state courts, and that is the biggest problem I see going into any case.
It's also been reported that the Chief Justice of the Hawaii Supreme Court participated in these sessions at the same time that his court was reviewing one of these climate lawsuits. So active litigation and yet happily being indoctrinated by interested parties in an ex parte sitting where the opposing counsel had no opportunity to refute the indoctrination. Mr. Walter, the Climate Judiciary Project tells judges that climate lawsuits are a, quote, unique opportunity for accountability. Would you call that education, or would you call that political indoctrination disguised as training?
Accountability is the standard term used by political activists to try to say, we want to hurt those folks that we're opposed to.
Do you believe Congress should investigate whether these trainings are undermining the impartiality of the judiciary?
Absolutely, Senator.
Thank you. Senator Whitehouse.
Well, the funny thing about this conversation is that time did not begin.
Thank you. Dr. Jacobs, President Trump has made it a national priority to expand offshore oil and gas production. NOAA plays a key role in reviewing permits and issuing authorizations under the Marine Mammal Protection Act and other laws. If you're confirmed, how will you improve the efficiency of the offshore permitting process, particularly when it comes to environmental reviews under NEPA or the MMPA?
Thank you for the question, Senator. If confirmed, I'll work with the White House to find efficiencies to unlock America's energy potential, consistent with the executive order of Unleashing American Energy.
Mr. Jordan, a persistent challenge within NOAA has been the siloed structure of its line offices, which has resulted in research projects stalling or never transitioning into operational use. NOAA must close the gap between research and operations in order to give the public and decision makers more timely and actionable information. How would you accelerate the research to operations timeline at NOAA and foster greater collaboration across line offices?
Thank you for the question, Senator. So moving the research closer to the operational sister line offices of NOAA would be important to take that research from OAR, where it currently exists now, and moving it to the Weather Service or the National Ocean Service. The closeness with the operational end user, the outcome of that data will foster greater collaboration and innovation. And you also get that feedback loop of research to operations, operations to research. The operations really should be driving what the research is focusing on.
Dr. Jacobs, we have seen a pattern of dual-engine flameouts caused by water and hail ingestion when aircraft descend into severe storms. Unlike commercial jets, NOAA's hurricane hunters use turboprops, which are less vulnerable because they do not pull water directly into the engines. Can you and the Department of Commerce commit to working with the FAA to ensure that a future improved hurricane hunter fleet uses appropriate technology to prevent deadly incidents?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I spent many years in the aviation industry. The turboprops operate differently. They essentially aren't affected by the air-fuel ratio, and that's what helps them in saturated environments, and would definitely commit to working with the FAA on this issue.
Great. Hurricanes have also been known to pick up entire homes off their foundations. How big would a drone need to be to navigate through a hurricane, and to your knowledge, is such a drone available?
Well, I think, well, thank you for the question. There's probably two capabilities. One would be flying against the wind and one flying with the wind. So for the last couple of years, one of the things that NOAA's been doing is deploying small drones inside of the hurricane to fly around, but they're a foot or two long. There's other potential opportunities to fly above the hurricane and deploy things through the hurricane. I think it's to be determined if we can actually fly one through the hurricane, but I have been in conversations with a couple of companies that are interested in potentially testing some capabilities.
And in your judgment, what are the benefits of artificial intelligence for improving weather forecasting?
The primary benefit, in my opinion, is computational efficiency. Even if the artificial intelligence can't do something better, if it can do it faster and more efficiently, I think it's worth using.
Okay. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jacobs, looking forward to meeting with you. And I've missed a lot of the hearings.
Thank you to each of you. Mr. Bridenstine, let's start with China, a topic you addressed at some considerable length. China is on an aggressive timeline to put astronauts on the lunar surface by 2030, and they appear on track to do so. They're also currently operating a space station right now in low Earth orbit. Mr. Bridenstine, China is racing to control the moon and low Earth orbit, and they're not shy about using space to expand their power on Earth. If America doesn't beat them, if we cede the lunar surface or continuous presence in orbit to Beijing, what does that mean for our national security, our economy, and America's leadership?
Very important question. So here's how I view things, and I think the general will appreciate this from my time as a lieutenant in the Navy. We did joint professional military education, and we learned this thing called the DIME theory of national power. And in each of those elements, you have, it's an acronym, DIME: diplomatic, information, military, economic power. When I was at the helm of NASA, my goal was to always think about what we're doing in those elements. How does this advance diplomatic power? How does it advance information power, military power, and economic power? On the diplomatic side, you mentioned the International Space Station and the next generation commercial space stations. On the diplomatic side, we have like 15 different countries that are operating the International Space Station today. We've had astronauts from, I think, 21 different countries at this point. We've had agreements with actively, I think we've got over 600 or 700 agreements now internationally as it relates to missions. NASA is a key element of diplomatic power for this country. I will tell you, I don't think it's often used correctly. I mean, we could put it on the table for a whole host of, kind of carrot and stick kind of activities to benefit the United States of America and an America First policy. That's the way I thought about it when I was the NASA administrator. On the information power side of things, one of my big things that I had, one of my first eye-opening experiences at NASA, when we landed InSight on Mars. This was a lander that was going to land on Mars and help us understand Mars quakes. Like, how is it organized inside? Well, when we landed InSight on Mars, it was on the cover of every newspaper worldwide. That's amazing information power, including one newspaper was the hardline newspaper of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in Iran. Now, I'm not saying we want to win their press, but at the end of the day, it was a story about how we landed on Mars.
But their Sunday comics are excellent.
But it was a story about how we landed on Mars, and it was a story about how we did it, when we did it, what we were doing, and it had a list at the end. The last was all of our international partners that participated with us in that. This is a newspaper in Iran where they don't get good information about the United States of America, but when we land on Mars, it changes things. It changes the perception of young people towards this country that we love. And I think that's an important power, information power. Of course, everybody likes to talk, Apollo 11 when we landed on the moon and the whole world watched. I mean, that's information power that we reference even today. If we can land on the moon, why can't we do these things? That kind of thing. On the military side, NASA is not strong. We don't play military. We don't report to the Secretary of Defense. But a lot of our technologies and capabilities, in fact, have dual use capability. One thing that concerns me greatly right now is the devastating consequences happening to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory out in California, JPL. They're the ones that build all the Mars landers. They're the ones that have landed on Mars 9 times in history. But a lot of that technology, make no mistake, has military application, and we're at risk of losing a lot of that. So I think that's important to note as well. Finally, that's the military side of things, but it's really not where NASA plays. NASA plays in exploration, science, discovery. The E, and this goes back to the opening statements, the E is economic power. When it comes to pharmaceuticals, regenerative medicines, advanced materials, article came out, China is using their space station to create new advanced materials for hypersonics, materials that my understanding is we don't have right now, although maybe somebody knows something I don't know. At the end of the day, we have to use microgravity, where we know atoms and molecules organize differently. We have to use it to our advantage, and advanced materials, China is doing that. And we're not doing it the way we should, and we're at risk of losing it. So all of those elements, I think, are important. When we think about the great power competition with China, we need to think about NASA being used for diplomatic power, information power, military power, and economic power.
Thank you. Gateway will be America's eye in the sky in cislunar space, extending our lunar surface program by enabling longer missions, heavy equipment delivery, and protection of U.S. assets, while paving the way for advanced infrastructure like Interim Administrator Duffy's goal of a lunar nuclear reactor by 2030. Meanwhile, China has made it clear that it intends to build its own cislunar station as a platform to dominate the moon and to pursue critical resources such as helium-3. Mr. Gold, in your judgment, why is it critical that the United States lead with Gateway and cislunar before China builds its own cislunar station and uses it to control the moon?
Thank you, Senator. When I was at NASA, I got a briefing on our ability, or should I say inability, to monitor Chinese activities in cislunar space. I didn't sleep for a week. You hear democracy dies in darkness. Our freedom could die in the depths of space if we are not able to monitor and understand what's happening with space situational awareness around the moon. And relative to nuclear on the moon, you mentioned helium-3. It's not just about the moon, it's about Earth. The countries and companies that control the moon will control the Earth. It's just a matter of time. Rare earth elements, helium-3. We need to be able to extract these resources. We need to be able to learn to live off the land. I'm a native of the great state of Montana, did a lot of camping and fishing back in the day. I can't imagine going on those camping trips if I had to bring all of my air, all of my water, all of my food, all of my oxygen. You can't have a sustainable, robust presence or support economic activities if you can't live off the land. And we can't do that without nuclear. And I cannot praise Secretary Duffy enough for acknowledging that this isn't about just going back to the moon. This is about going back to the moon, harnessing its resources for the Earth, and establishing infrastructure and a permanent presence. The Secretary gets that, and I applaud him for moving forward with nuclear. And by the way, breaking news, our friend Amit is now the Associate Administrator of NASA. And again, I very much appreciate Secretary Duffy's decisive action, his decisive leadership in elevating the head of the Moon Mars program to Associate Administrator, the highest civil servant post at NASA. That sends an important message, not just to NASA, but to our international partners and even to China, that we're back. We are reigniting the torch of Artemis, and we're going to go forward to the moon. I can tell you the NASA civil servants needed to hear that. And again, I'm very grateful to Secretary Duffy for making that point. At Redwire, we're developing a system called Mason that's going to use microwaves to sinter regolith, to create landing pads, berms, roads. We need to be able to build that infrastructure. But more than anything, we need to be able to rebuild our credibility here on Earth. When I was negotiating the gateway agreements with the European Space Agency, and thank you for that privilege, Jim, they learned one thing about popular culture, maybe from the comics and the Tehran Times there, Lucy and the football. They told me, Lucy and the football, why should we sign up with you? Trump administration will be gone in a year and a half. We would look foolish for making that investment. And I told them, you know what, you're right. Don't listen to me. They're justifiably skeptical. NASA has failed to sustain a beyond LEO human spaceflight program since Apollo. Failure hasn't just been an option, it's been a certainty. So how did I convince the Europeans? Senator Cantwell, I had your help. And I told them, don't listen to me. Listen to Senator Cantwell. Listen to Senator Nelson. Listen to the bipartisan coalition that Jim Bridenstine created. Because if we lose, then they will carry forward. And if we cannot show that we can be a good partner, that we can be a reliable partner, all the benefits that we talked about, diplomatically, economically, will go to others. We're talking a lot about Star Trek. The reason I love Star Trek, not just the adventure, not just the stories, but because it said we're not going to have just better technology, but a better future in space. We launch not just our astronauts and hardware, we launch our values. And if we can't move forward with Gateway, if we can't move forward with Artemis, we will lose that future to the Chinese.
Well, thank you both for your testimony. I will say I was disappointed with both of you that you guys left Matt Damon on the surface of Mars. But other than that, you both did an excellent job. Rankings. Mr. Knowles, welcome to the swamp. I will say I'm very confused being in a room with you and there are no cigars and no scotch. I cannot recall the last time that transpired. I appreciate the testimony of everyone here. The topic we're considering is, I think, of exceptional importance. There is an epidemic of politically motivated violence. And the politically motivated violence in this country is overwhelmingly emanating from the left. We saw that during the Black Lives Matter and Antifa riots across the country as cities across America burned. We saw that during the anti-Semitic protests on college campuses, as Jewish students in particular were threatened and feared for their lives. We saw that with the pro-open border riots in Los Angeles and other cities. And we saw that tragically with the murder of Charlie Kirk, someone who was a good friend to many of us and an extraordinary leader. Mr. Knowles, you too were targeted on a college campus. What does it say about the state of our universities that holding a debate on a public campus now requires police barricades, bomb squads, and body armor?
My question is, what are the universities for? Aren't the universities for educating students? Aren't the universities for pursuing truth? If the universities are not advancing those goals, as manifestly they are not, then I think we need to strongly consider defunding those universities. I think we need to strongly consider not sending our children to those universities because they have been perverted against their very purpose. And this is so apparent in much of the left-wing discourse. To me, it seems, hearing even mainstream Democrats on this, that for them, their violence is speech and our speech is violence. There was no more gracious or generous or charitable debater on college campuses than Charlie Kirk. He always endeavored to hear out the other side, to steelman their arguments, to give them the benefit of the doubt, and he was killed for it. He was killed for ideological reasons, and that has to be an inflection point. And as far as I'm concerned, if the universities and the political order cannot shore up a healthy marketplace for debate, they're useless.
Look, I think you are absolutely right. I think our universities are failing profoundly in that regard. At Columbia University during the anti-Semitic protests, the Orthodox rabbi on campus sent an email to the Jewish students on campus and said, "Do not come to campus because the university cannot and will not protect you." That is a fundamental abdication of their most essential responsibility, which is to protect their students. And Columbia refused to protect them because ideologically they sided with the violent protesters. And let me ask, the attack on your event, was that a spontaneous protest or was it organized, planned, and well-funded?
It was the latter, Senator, and we can point to the specific networks, we can point to the anarchist bookshops, we can point to the email addresses for the tax-free nonprofit organizations that were funneling the donations to these people. This is organized left-wing crime.
I'm not the only person who noticed in the anti-Semitic protests that the tents all matched. There is real money. There is real money, and it is many of the same networks, unfortunately, whether they are open border radicals, whether they are anti-capitalist communists, whether they are jihadists. The funding is steady and significant. Mr. Wolf, in 2020, under your leadership, DHS officers stood on the front lines in Portland, facing more than 100 consecutive nights of siege against the Mark O. Hatfield Federal Courthouse. Officers were assaulted with commercial-grade fireworks, lasers, and Molotov cocktails. Were those random outbursts, or were they coordinated, resourced operations with strategy, logistics, and financing behind them?
Oh, without a doubt, Senator, they were coordinated. I had the chance to visit Portland during the middle of that 100-day period, and from the Hatfield Courthouse where I was, you could see into the park below tents, a lot of them, a lot of tents. And I asked my federal officers at the time, what's in the tents? They said, well, we don't know. We can't go over there. The Portland police won't help us understand what's going on over there. We eventually sent an undercover agent there, and his response was, it's weapons, it's munitions, it's a variety of different things that get resupplied almost on a daily basis.
Wow.
So yes, organized.
These same checkbooks are funding the chaos in Minneapolis, in Portland, in Los Angeles. It's why I've introduced the Stop Funders Act. The Stop Funders Act adds rioting as a predicate offense to RICO to enable the Department of Justice to use the full tools that have been directed at the mafia to go after the corrupt enterprise. Because at the end of the day, the thug who is engaged in violence is committing criminal acts, but the billionaire who is trying to tear down this country by writing checks to fund it bears, in many ways, far greater responsibility. Mr. Wolf, in your judgment, would passing the Stop Funders Act, adding rioting as a predicate act to RICO, assist DOJ in going after and stopping these coordinated, politically motivated acts of violence?
Yeah, absolutely it would. And happy to say that America First Policy Institute has endorsed that piece of legislation as well, because you have to understand where they're getting their finance, where they're getting their backing. And if you can't use the resources that the Department of Justice should be using, it's going to make it very difficult. In 2020, we simply ran out of time before we left office in 21. It's my understanding the Department of Justice and FBI are looking into this financing. So giving them additional quivers in their bag, I think would be very good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. So I want to thank all the witnesses for being here today and for your testimony. Written questions for them may be submitted for the record until Tuesday, November 4th at 5 p.m. And with that, this